You're listening to If Only I Were Wiser podcast, where Raina Wilson brings together wisdom and raw life stories to provide encouragement and truth. So many times it's easy to become discouraged in your own pursuit of health because your story or circumstances look drastically different from your favorite influencer or even the expectations you had for yourself. If that is you, welcome! This space is for you to learn, breathe, and maybe just listen and see what wellness could look like for you. Hey friends, welcome back to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast. On today's episode, I have seminary student Gabby Wilkinson. Gabby has been working in ministry since 2014, and at Emory University's Chandler School of Theology, Gabby is studying the intersectionality of mental illness and Christianity through the lens of church trauma and is working to make this area of focus the driving force of her vocation. She recently created a brand called Dear God, I'm Sad, and the mission is to craft a healthier and more holistic relationship between mental illness and Christianity through reflection, investigation, and exploration, with the hopes of destigmatizing mental illness in faith spaces. That's exactly what this episode is all about. Gabby shares a little bit about her story and what her own healing journey has looked like with mental illness, as well as what it should look like to have this conversation in a healthy manner within the church and faith-based communities. I was so thankful to have this conversation because I definitely think it's a big topic that needs to be addressed more. So, without further ado, let's dive in. Hello, Gabby. Welcome to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast.
Oh, I'm so excited. Thank you so much for having me and asking me to be on this. I'm so excited to talk.
Of course. I would love just to start by what is one thing that is bringing you joy right now?
Ooh, one thing that is bringing me joy right now. Well, okay, this is a little too on the nose, but for my podcast, Dear God, I'm Sad, I recently created some merch and I've literally never done that before. I'm not really creative. I don't know how to do that. Like I was just like guessing. And I haven't really like launched it yet because I'm still wearing and trying out the stuff, but just the idea of starting something new and doing something that's like very much out of my comfort zone, something that is also very exciting and um just like diving into something that's exciting and new and like different has been giving me a lot of life recently, and so this was just the newest facet of that. So.
Oh, for sure. Which is so funny because I went to a business meeting yesterday for a
Mhm.
meeting that I've like dreamt about for a year. And then I
Oh.
like the entire drive, I was just praying and I like called my dad and was like, what am I doing? Like, who do I think that I am? Like, what
Yeah.
am I walking into? I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just a weenie in this world. Like, I don't know.
Just guessing,
But
yeah.
yeah, I can totally empathize because that was literally the same conversation I had with my husband and my dad yesterday. It was like, doing big things is so scary sometimes.
Mhm.
And knowing that you feel like God has called you to do something doesn't make it any less scary.
Right. It makes it a little more scary, honestly, because it's even like more pressure, and then it's like it's also like comfortable that like, okay, God believes that I can do this, so that's nice, but it's also like I would never have thought I was able to do this if it wasn't for
Mm-mm.
God. So that's also like so frightening. So yeah, I totally feel you.
I wouldn't have chosen this for me, you know? Wouldn't have picked out this life for me.
Yeah, which is like what growing up is. You just realize like there's so many different things that happen that you're like, I literally never would have imagined myself or thought of myself doing this, but here we are.
No, I think it's so funny to look back. And I remember telling my mom in high school, we would go shopping at like Ross or Marshall's, and I'd like see all the home decor stuff and be like, oh, I can't wait to decorate my own house or my own apartment one day.
Yeah.
And then fast forward to like college Raina and now adult Raina. Like, that stuff's expensive. Like, I don't want to decorate my own house. I
Yeah.
don't know how to do this.
Literally. And you're like, sure, I guess this is how we do this.
Yep. Nobody's telling me how to do this, so we're just gonna wing it.
Yeah.
But I would love to dive in to just hear the beginning of your story. Where did you start? How did you get to where you are right now in your podcast and your merch? I would just love to hear like what it's looked like grassroots for you to get here.
Yeah, so I guess the very, very beginning of it all is, um, my own background with mental illness. So, Dear God, I'm Sad, for listeners who don't know what it is my podcast, my brand, which has a mission to create a more holistic and healthier relationship between mental illness and Christianity. And so its mission, which is like fancy words just to say, let's respond and treat mental illness better than we have in the past as an institution, as a religion, because we just can. So, what got me to that, wanting to do that, got me here, is me being diagnosed with my own mental illnesses over a span of a few years. But the first time being my junior year of high school, I was diagnosed with depression and addiction to self harm. And what really, when I am doing my work now, what I think about back to like 15-year-old Gabby who's going through that, I think about how lost I felt and how disconnected I felt from God, and how I felt like I was experiencing this absent God who just was distant and
Mm.
indifferent and didn't really care that I was struggling and could take this away, take this pain away, but wasn't for some reason. And um, so I think that, and also in that time, that junior year of high school, I also didn't really have anyone to talk to about it. Anyone who was of faith, not of faith. I didn't feel comfortable talking to anyone. It wasn't something we talked about in church at all, except for maybe the like
Yeah.
maybe sometimes the usual like don't worry about tomorrow because tomorrow will be fine type of situations, but never
Yeah.
really about mental health. I didn't really even know what was going on with me, like depression and self-harm
Mm.
and other mental health words just weren't even things in my vocabulary. I just didn't even know what that was. And I came from a context that taught us that like depression just means you're really sad, or like OCD is just like you're washing your hands a lot, or
Mm.
bipolar disorder is just like you're really happy
Right.
sometimes, really sad the other times. Like these super generic, not super accurate, very invalidating definitions where you don't even really understand what the mental illness is. So from struggling with that until probably honestly just continuing to struggle with mental illness in different facets. Today, I've been also diagnosed with unspecified personality disorder. Um, I went to college and my mental health challenges did not get any easier. They actually got much worse in college. Um, but at the same time, my relationship with God was growing stronger. Like I was just learning more and I was in more
Mm-hmm.
community than I had been before. And it also kind of it made me question even more like this, it was almost cognitive dissonance of like having so much pain, but also like being told that I like as a Christian, we don't really suffer too much because we love Jesus, or we're not supposed to be sad because Jesus brings us joy and all this stuff. It was kind of this moment of like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I get that I'm a Christian and so I can like rest on God and so I don't have to be worried about things and I don't need to have anxiety, blah blah blah, but I still do. So like what's missing?
Yeah.
Like what am I missing that I'm still suffering so badly? Um and I wasn't really getting answers from my Christian fellowship. I wasn't really getting answers from my community until maybe junior year of college. I started interning at a church, and through that, I got a lot of mentors, and was taught. I started talking about my mental illness and integration with the church for the first time. Like they let me speak at their worship night and just talk about all
Mm.
of my self-harming issues, and getting to talk about how I learned that like God was with me in those nights where I thought I was alone, and that I'm not
Right.
like my identity isn't Cutter, it's like beloved child of God, like first and foremost. And from there everything else sprouts from. So that was like the first time that I ever got to kind of integrate these things that felt like two different worlds to me into just like
Mm-hmm.
one thing, and bringing it together and having a space where I can talk about it and talk about God in the same sentence. Um, and so then from there, it kind of started this like this roller coaster of thoughts, and I started just writing a lot, and I started compiling ideas around this intersection and this integration of mental illness and Christianity. And I really felt that God was calling me to do something with all this stuff. Like I just years
Mm.
of there's like this folder on my computer called Sad Girl, and it's just like years worth of just different like pieces of writing I wrote, just of my thoughts, like a journal, and then also ideas of like, oh, it'd be really cool to go to seminary, or like it would be really cool to do this thing and that thing, and
Wow.
just different
Yeah.
things. Because I just knew it was going to turn into something, and I wanted to keep tabs of like what I was thinking and these ideas in one place. And so eventually I had the call to go to seminary. I had a call to ministry first and then seminary. And I finished my first semester of seminary, and I was just like so amped up on everything I was learning in seminary that I was like, okay, whatever this thing is, whatever this folder is supposed to become, like, I just have to do it now. Like, it just finally felt like the right time.
Mm.
And things just slowly started revealing itself to me of like a podcast is a really good communication style, and having Instagram, because social media is such a big thing right now, and making it like more than just that, making it a whole like brand or like initiative or project is really where my heart is. And from that, I've been able to like reopen that folder and start like reading the things I wrote and implementing all these ideas that I had over the years. And that has brought me to here. There's a lot more to the story, but that's like the overall broad. And that's brought me here. So
That's just so cool to hear, like, the seeds that the Lord has planted,
yeah.
like, over the course of your story
Mm.
to now, like, you said out of faithfulness, you get to, like, see it to
Yeah.
fruition.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
scary, for sure.
It's scary because you just don't know. Because also part of you is like, "Is this, like, silly? Like, is this even, like, a good idea?" I remember when I first came up with, like, the phrase, "Dear God, I'm sad," for the title, I was like at first I was so amped up, and then I just second guessed it, and I was like, sounds stupid." And then,
This is dumb, right? Yep.
you get in your head.
You start speaking all those things of yourself. Well, maybe
Yeah.
I have to say this a whole bunch of times, so this is dumb. I don't know if I can say this a whole bunch of times. I can't commit to
Yes,
this.
it's like when you take a picture of yourself and you look at it for too long and you're like, that's actually a really bad picture."
Yep.
You kinda yeah.
It does play a role into mental illness because I would say my own story started in high school. Things were chaotic. We had like a flood one year that I remember waking up to go to a track meet at like 5 a.m. and coming downstairs and everything was like underwater.
Mm,
I was like, oh, okay, peace out. I need to go to this track meet. And like 2 years before, my dad had been in this like emergency surgery from his appendix. So like he was rotting from the
stop.
inside out. And the doctor literally had sent him home 2 weeks prior to that and said, oh yeah, you have the flu. And then when we were like in the ER, I like got picked up from a choir. It's like my fifth grade choir
Mhm.
concert or something.
Yeah.
And um we ran to the hospital and the doctor was like, had you not been here, like you would have died because your whole intestines were like rotting from this infection that
Mhm.
apparently you had the flu. And then fast forward, our house was struck by lightning and completely burned down. Yeah.
Wow.
So we were homeless in high school for like a year and a half. I say homeless as in like I literally left that morning and had to wear my neighbor's like chanclas because we had no clothes.
What?
We ran out of the house like without shoes on. And that's where I met the Lord. But I say that because I remember thinking I really struggled with suicidal ideation in college or in high school, trying to process through all of, just all of these big feelings because I felt like
Yeah.
one thing after another was happening. But at the same time, I was introduced to a faith community, which I had never had before. But it wasn't a
Mm,
conversation, like you said, that I remember the day I took my two closest friends before we walked to class and I said, I think I tried to kill myself last night.
yeah.
And they like looked at me and were like, wait, what? And I was like, I don't know what it was. I just remember like writing letters to like my friends and family. And I had had like some medicine from my gynecologist for my periods, like, but that was all my brain could
Mm,
process. And they didn't know how to react. But I also like I didn't have the tools or the words to be able to communicate that in a safe place. So I can completely empathize and
yeah, yeah.
I'm very thankful now that we may have the tools to be able to communicate and verbalize, hey, I'm hurting and I'm struggling with depression, I'm struggling with anxiety, suicidal
Yeah.
ideation. But I would
Yeah.
just love to hear where you think the church community is starting to lack in this initial conversation, or where do you think would be the first starting place to start having healthy conversations within our faith communities?
Yeah. So you kind of spoke to it in your own story and as well as mine that there just seems to be a lack of knowledge and a lack of like even knowing what to say or how to say what we're experiencing and going through. So for me, I am very like
Mm,
passionate about making sure the starting point that we have in the church is education. Like I think every clergy member, every pastor, every layperson needs to know and needs to have a basic education, like a
right.
class or a workshop or something to tell them this is what this is, this is what this is.
Mm,
Here are the symptoms. You don't have to diagnose people. You don't even have to necessarily look for the symptoms, but here are the ways to talk about this, and here are the ways to maybe not talk about it. And so I think the first thing is just to communicate to the community about what these things are so they can identify it within themselves and then come alongside those who are suffering as well. And I think we just haven't had that. We haven't shaped the church and ministry in a way for us to be able to foster that type of conversation and have that type of education of sitting people down and talking about these things. So that's the first thing I would say. I think the second thing that I would say where maybe we need a little more work and we're lacking is responding
right.
to that mental illness as well as not. I'm just not sure how helpful it is to look at someone in the eye and be like, just pray about that and you'll be okay. I'm not sure how helpful it is to say like you just need to work
Mm-hmm.
on your faith. Because mental illness at the end of the day is not solely or primarily a spiritual issue. It's biological, it's psychological, it's scientific. And so, us trying to meet science with spirit is not always the best way to go about that. And so, I think also understanding and studying
Mm,
how God and Jesus in scripture encounters people who are suffering mentally. I think that's like something we really need to look at and then maybe just model that encounter
mm-hmm.
because God never invalidated people and never told them that their issue was that they didn't love God enough. Like that just wasn't um that's just not how divinity encountered human suffering. And so I'm not sure that's how we should encounter human suffering as representatives of the divine.
Right.
Um, and so yeah, I think that the education piece though is like probably the biggest piece because a lot of it isn't even that people are trying to be malicious or belittle people or invalidate them. It's truly just like
Mm,
they were taught this and they're doing what they think is best because they love you and they care for you. But what they think is best is lacking some form of education and is lacking some form of knowledge. And so if we can just combat that first, I think that would save a lot of hurt and a lot of confusion in the church.
yeah. And I think similar to, I remember taking those classes in college for, what is it, QPR, like how to identify people that may be walking through suicidal ideation.
Yeah.
It's like, what if we had the tools or the words to be able to see that in someone else that may be struggling with clinical anxiety or depression, or these other manifestations of mental illness, and it be met first with more questions, I think, versus the condemnation. And again,
Yeah.
like, we're all sinful and we're all broken, but I think the common theme in this conversation is so many times we respond like Job's friends, and not in a good way. It's very
Yeah.
much like, okay, but do you love the Lord? Are you saved? Have you been praying about this? Like, I've gotten that before. Like, yes,
Yeah.
I've been praying about it and I'm still sad.
Yeah, literally, literally.
And my brain still does not turn off. And I've tried the melatonin, and then it's like I've done all of the other world things too
Mhm.
to make it turn off.
Sure.
So I think definitely education it would give people just the power and the language to identify or even where to push resources.
Yeah.
Because I don't think the solution would be pushing everyone to I think a mental health professional at first either.
Hmm.
I think that might be
Hmm.
some level of just like a cop out, I think that mental health professionals in this sense are really
Hmm.
healthy, but there were so many conversations I had with people in my own story and others where it was like, well, have you gone to counseling? Well, sometimes counseling, maybe you can speak more on this, but
Hmm.
maybe counseling isn't the first step for me right now.
Yeah, yeah. And also maybe counseling, like everyone can't afford counseling. So it's also like
Mm,
you have to or have the time or whatever it may be. They just don't have access or ability to encounter that. And yeah, I think sometimes counseling just isn't for everyone.
hmm.
I do think like therapy is so helpful and
Yeah.
is so good if it's good for you. Like I think it's 100% amazing. Um but I think there are like situations where
Hmm.
like people just don't find the right therapist, and sometimes people don't have the right fit, and sometimes um that system isn't that
Yeah.
system fails people. And so yeah, I totally like validate in your experience of like, yeah, that just
Hmm.
like didn't that wasn't helpful for me either. So, which I'm sorry about. Shouldn't be how that just shouldn't be how it is.
So, what would you encourage as kind of like a healthy progression? Like, if you were to sit across from who you used to be and where you were, what, knowing now, how would you speak to that Gabby if you could play out everything almost in a picturesque world?
Hmm. Let's see. I think for me as a person of faith, I think I would first tell younger Gabby I would first want younger Gabby to have this foundation and belief that like God is with you right now. Like God is not distant, God is not indifferent.
Hmm.
God is literally suffering with you. God knows this pain firsthand and is with you in this moment. Um and I think whenever you tell people that and you help them to understand that, like, when Jesus suffered on the cross, God literally entered into that suffering. And so we're not alone when we're suffering. I think that just makes things so much lighter that you're not alone. The most powerful force in the
Mm-hmm.
entire universe understands you and knows you and loves you and is supporting you through this like long dark night. I think that would be the first thing to tell Gabby and anyone of faith that the most powerful force on this earth is with you and for you, and so we will get through this. This will pass, I
Mm-hmm.
promise, and you will overcome. I think that would be the first thing, and then I would something that younger Gabby did a lot was hide. I lied to a lot of people about the things I was suffering
Mm.
through, um, for multiple reasons. It was pretty multifaceted. Why I didn't one, I just didn't know what was going on with me, so I didn't even know how to communicate it. I thought people would like see me
Right.
differently, and I was very much the person that was like, I need people to think that
Mm-hmm.
like Gabby has it together. Like my worth was very much put in like this
Yeah.
idea that like Gabby's the one that gets good grades and Gabby's the one that like hangs out with people and goes to the parties. Like I put a
Mm-hmm.
lot of my worth in like appearing a certain way. And so I felt like if I told people I was suffering, that appearance would shatter and change, and then that would change my worth in some way. Um,
Yeah.
I also just didn't think people would like me as much if they knew I was so sad and knew what I was going through. I just didn't think I would be loved in the same way. So, um, I would also tell younger Gabby to start talking to people about it. Like safe
Mm.
people. Don't just like go tell everyone,
Right.
because some
Yeah.
people are not for you and they will not help you. But like I was lying to the closest people in my life. I was lying to these people who really loved me and who talk to me now and are like, Gabby, I just wish like I could have been there for you because I just love you.
Mm.
Um and so when I did start talking about it and telling people, which was like months after everything had happened or everything had started, there was this like healing within me that happened. Like I started to one accept that this was just an aspect of my life experience now, but also it brought me so close to other people. And I think that human connection and coming alongside other humans is so healing and is like
Mm.
key to getting through this life, because life is
Yeah.
just hard. Like life is just hard, period. But if we can come together and hold each other up and walk through the hard together, I think that makes everything so much easier and so much more livable is a big thing. It makes it
Mhm.
so much more livable. And so I also would, so like from building this foundation of like God's with you and for you, and then moving to like the people who love you and who you need in your life will love you regardless of what is going on in your mind and your heart. So
Yeah.
tell people is like the next thing. Um, and then from there, the progression I would tell Gabby to go through, younger Gabby to go through, is also to figure out how to treat this best for yourself. Like for me, therapy was
Mm.
awesome. That's like 100% what I needed.
Yeah.
And so I would say go to therapy, get the medication you need, and then yeah, find what works and what makes this life livable for you. Because this we're not supposed to just like we're not supposed to slow mo through life and just kind of like be in a trance. Like this is a life is
Mhm.
big and abundant and beautiful, and that's what God promises us. So trying to live into that full life that God has promised us, and that full life that like God wants for us, living into that is what we should do and like what we should
Yeah,
fight for ourselves. So
definitely. I think you've touched on it a little bit, mentioning like
mhm.
younger Gabby definitely believed the lie that God was distant. I also believe the lie that like I was at fault somehow
Yeah,
for
yeah,
the
yeah.
things that I was feeling.
Yeah.
What would you say are some of the common lies that you've seen in your own story or in this pursuit of finding this intersectionality with faith
Yeah.
that are some of the common lies that people fall into that prevent them from healing?
Oh man. So many, so many. I think um the first two we named is one, the idea that God is distant and uncaring and indifferent, when God is actually very close and near and understands and is processing through it with you. Um, the Another big one that I hear a lot is that people think it's their fault. Like you were saying, I definitely thought it was my fault. Like I
Hmm.
felt like I don't even, it doesn't even make sense in hindsight, but I felt like I
Right.
had somehow put this on myself. And like,
Hmm.
not only was I like the cause of it, but also I was the reason that it wasn't going away. Like, I just wasn't doing the right things. Like, I wasn't, again, like
Right.
praying enough or like reading scripture enough or like believing in God enough or loving God enough. So that's a big one I keep hearing in a lot of people's stories, is like they just feel this sense of over responsibility and like guilt around their mental health challenge or their mental illness. I think another one that I read in a lot of depression memoirs or mental health challenge memoirs is that, how do I put this? This one's a little more difficult because this is really like theologically controversial, but the idea
Hmm.
that God is making you suffer through this to make you a stronger,
Hmm.
like quote unquote soldier, or
Right.
believer or whatever. And some people really do hold that, and some people need that to believe that like God is putting them through this to like get to the other side to be like a better believer, a better Christian or whatever.
Yeah.
I personally find that to be a lie, because I just don't believe in a God who would make us suffer and who like imposes that
Mm.
suffering on us, and imposes that pain on us. Um, because that just doesn't sound like a God I would like or like vibe with.
Right.
Um, So that's a big one, but that's, again, that's just something the theological world is talking about,
Yeah.
because it's also this idea of like, this is a bigger thing that like we don't need to get into, but also this idea of like God letting bad things happen versus God making bad things
Okay.
happen, that kind of stuff. Which is
Yeah.
just a whole denominational thing. Um,
Interesting. Okay.
yeah. So I think, but yeah, I think those are also, actually, another thing is that I think, this isn't even necessarily faith oriented, but also the idea that like your diagnosis or your mental health challenge is somehow tied to your worth. And so it's like now that
Mm-hmm.
I have depression, I'm like less valued or like less capable of love or less
Mm-hmm.
loving, and that it
Right.
just changes. We put a bigger, it's almost like we're putting a bigger emphasis or anchor on it, that it like dictates other things about our life and about our personhood and about our Christianity and our faith, than it actually does, in my opinion.
Mm.
um, and so that was a big one for me, that like, and that's why for Dear God I'm Sad, the kind of like core mantra is sad and loved, because it's this idea that like just because you're suffering from this mental illness, it doesn't mean that you're less loved or less loving. And just because you are loved and you are capable of loving others, it doesn't mean that you're never going to suffer from your mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the opposite of that, which is the lie, is that like this idea of sad but loved, or loved but sad, in the sense of like one negates the other. And
Right.
it just doesn't. That's just not how
No.
it's not how this world works. It's not how the next world works. Like, so yeah, I think those are probably the big lies.
Yeah, I've definitely been sad and loved.
Mm-hmm.
It
Yeah,
doesn't,
we are.
I don't, it doesn't go away,
Mm-mm. No.
even though I love the Lord. And that's been a lot of those conversations, those candid conversations I've had with the Lord is like, hey, I'm really pissed off, or I'm really sad, or I'm really confused, and I'm really hurting. And this still sucks.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and it's not going away, Lord. Like, what
Yeah.
the heck?
Yeah.
So, how would you begin to encourage, I think, that reconciliation of holding both and as believers?
How would I encourage it? I think one, I would, well, two things I think I would ask someone to start with is to, one, just look at scripture. Like, look at how Jesus encountered people. He didn't love people less because they had leprosy, or he didn't like it, like encounter certain people in a way of like marginalizing them or invalidating their experience, or literally just loving them less because of something they were suffering through or suffering with. And that Jesus love is the truest form of love, and that is the truest aspect of our identity. And so I would say, like, study scripture, look at Jesus's encounters with people. um I think that's evidence enough that like it's not but, it's and. I would also
Mm,
say to anyone that, I would say, like, also think about the people you love. Like, does their suffering or anytime they're going through something bad, does that change how much you love them? No, unless, like, maybe that's not a person you actually love. So that's something else to think about. Um,
yeah.
but it doesn't change how you encounter other
Right.
people. It doesn't change how much you love them. It doesn't change how much like you think that they love you or anything like that when other people are suffering. So it's just, it's no different. You're not special. It's no different than you, for you. Um, and overall, I think like my biggest encouragement is just the truth I found is just like we are created by such a good and compassionate God that God doesn't let our identity as the beloved or as children of God, loves children of God. God doesn't let that be erased by by like circumstance or by like suffering or pain or mental illness. It just,
Mm,
that's just not how God created us. Like, we're image bearers. We were made in God's image, and in the same way that like
yeah.
one aspect of God doesn't overshadow the everything of God, the personhood of God, the entity of God, the spirit of God,
Right.
it's the same for you. Like, you don't, your mental illness does not erase a single thing about who you are or how valued you are, or how much worth you have. It just can't do that. It just doesn't have that power. And because God didn't create it in a way and create you in a way to let it have that power. Um, and so you are loved regardless of if you're sad. And even if you're
Mm,
sad, and even though you're loved, doesn't mean that you have to feel guilty about being sad. Like, it's okay. It's all okay.
yeah. That was a beautiful reminder. I think recently in the Gospels, John, often refers to himself as the one whom Jesus loved. And for so long, I thought that was like an error of entitlement. Like I've heard it preached that way, that John was just like, I'm the one that Jesus loves the most, you know?
Yeah.
When recently I heard it described as, what if John fully believed that it wasn't a sense of entitlement or um like bragging rights, but it was who he believed his whole identity to be. So instead of
Mm,
John being in the tone that, yeah, I'm the one who Jesus loved, like better than all you guys, it was, I'm John, the one who Jesus loved, period. Like I'm
yeah.
just fully loved, and that's it. Like almost like his
Yeah.
last name, like that is his whole identity over everything else. So I think that
Hmm.
was just like a beautiful reminder with what you shared about our brokenness can't overshadow anything else that the Lord has claimed in us.
Yeah, 100%.
I'm super curious about your own studies in this area, as well as like your own personal opinion on where does mental health medication come into this? Because I've heard, even personally in biblical counseling, have heard it demonized or encouraged. So where does that play a role in this conversation with the church?
Sure. This is yeah, it's controversial for sure.
Yeah.
I think so. I'll say general, and then I'll say my opinion, personal opinion that
Okay.
um, I too have heard a lot of different things around it. I've had friends who have been told that that if they were to take medications, a sign of a lack of faith. Um,
Mm,
if they just like villainizing medication and stuff, I've heard that,
yeah.
and I think people can find merit in that, and I think people have found merit in that and have things to back up that argument. But for me, in my opinion, I I view medication as an answered prayer from God. I think that that is something that helps a lot of people, and I think it helps people
Hmm.
in the sense of it helps them to be able to experience this world in the way that God wanted them, like intended us to experience this world. And I think it medication helps people to live into an abundant and beautiful and good and fruitful life like God promises us. And so, in that way, I see it as a form of an answered prayer because without it, people aren't able to live into that life and aren't able to live into that, or some people, I'm
Hmm.
sorry, I'm not trying to say everyone, but some people aren't able to
Yeah. Right.
live into that abundance. And I think medication truly helps people to do that, some people to do that. With that being said, though, I am not, uh, of course, medication has been bad before. Of course, it's hurt people. Of course, it has had like
Right.
bad side effects. Of course, people have been medicated in the wrong way. And so it's definitely not to say one, like, what's that saying? One size fits all or whatever. Like, I'm not saying
Right.
like every single person that's diagnosed needs to have medication. There's a lot of people out there who are diagnosed that don't have medication and who
Hmm.
have other forms of treatment that helps them even better. So I'm not saying that everyone should be on medication if they're suffering. Certainly not saying that, but I am saying that I
Yeah.
think medication is a form of faithfulness if you need it and taking it.
Mm.
And I think it's a form of God just being good, that God has given us these big brains that can create this medication that can help
Hmm.
people. It just helps people most of the time. And so I think anything that helps people and that is good for people and that helps them to live into the potential that God has for them, I just think that's a form of God answering prayers. So,
Yeah. And it's definitely, like you said, a hot button topic. And I've heard it both ways. And like personally, I was on like clinical anxiety meds for several years in college. And I didn't realize they weren't working until I almost had a panic attack in class. I was like,
mm.
oh, it's like, oh, this is not doing what it's
You
supposed to be
know,
doing
it's
right
not
now.
supposed to happen that. So thanks.
Yeah. But I also think that like similar to antibiotics, like antibiotic. And again, people have feels about that too. So,
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah,
Lord has gifted people to be able to create things for a broken world with the hopes to heal, with the intention to heal. It doesn't always do that because there's the residual effects of sin everywhere. Um,
yeah,
but I definitely think I had personally found more freedom in understanding that one, it was my fault. Like the Lord didn't make me broken, like I wasn't born with the ill intention that I would not have, the right neurotransmitters like in my head. Like
yeah,
I
yeah, yeah,
remember thinking, having this conversation with a friend as we were both talking about as she was about to pursue her master's in biblical counseling. And we did a previous episode together. Um, I don't know if you remember that SpongeBob episode where Patrick, um, like gets the right brain. It was like in the brain coral field, and he like
yeah.
puts his head on, and it like actually connects. It's like that outlet that
Yeah,
actually connects, and then all of a
yeah, yeah,
sudden, like Patrick is smart for the rest of the day.
yeah. Oh my gosh.
All that to say, that's what like I picture when medication works for people for mental illness.
Yeah.
Because although it
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
necessarily work in the way that I was using it, prescribed, whatever, I found freedom outside of that. But I found healing thinking through that image of like, no, but what if the Lord gave everybody brain coral in a way that fixes,
Yeah,
fixes that outlet in their brain so like they don't think like this.
yeah.
And maybe you can speak more to this of just, I think the initial fall, Genesis 3, has residual
Mhm.
effects for everything,
Mhm.
for our bodies, for our minds. Like you said at the very beginning, it's our biology in a lot of these circumstances.
Yeah.
And it wasn't the Lord's ill intention, or he didn't make a mistake. He didn't punish us out of
Mhm.
that. But
Yeah.
it's definitely a topic, hot theological topic to think about. Like, this is also biology. It's not just your lack of faith in sinful nature.
Yeah, yeah. Like what you were saying 100%. Yeah, it's not we didn't construct our own brains. Like I didn't like choose to not get the right levels of serotonin or whatever those neurotransmitters are. Um
Mm-hmm.
it's just a thing. It's just a part of my brain. And I've learned to accept that and like that is okay. Again, it doesn't impact my worth or value or what I'm capable of moving forward, but also
Yeah.
it is biological, but also another beautiful thing is that like s- attending to your spiritual health really helps with alleviating mental illness symptoms and really helps with our mental health in general. Um,
Mm.
and so sure, like Genesis 3, the sin, like fallen world, original sin, and through that brokenness, we're still able to use scripture and we're still able to use uh, divine encounter and the spirit to help us through that brokenness. Like that's the point. It's kind of the point. Um, and so
Yeah.
yeah, it's still
Mm-hmm.
it's not the primary or sole treatment necessarily, but it helps. And I think that's also an answered prayer that
Yeah.
like I can just go to church and that really helps a lot. Like that's awesome.
Mm. Yeah. What encouragement would you give to those maybe that have maybe stepped away from a faith community altogether because of hurt in the mental
Yeah.
health conversation?
I would start out by saying uh I'm sorry that you had to experience that. That's not fair. That's not okay. And that's just not how it should be. And so I'm sorry that you had to go through that because
Mm.
religion is not supposed to hurt. Like baseline, we're not created as an institution. We weren't created as a people to hurt one another it through and in the name of God. So I'm sorry that that happened because that's not how it's
Mm.
meant to be. I would encourage that if you are looking to find that connection with God again, or find your faith again, I would encourage you to do your research, find a church that that has like small groups or something where you can start out small and go there. You don't necessarily have to sit in
Mm-hmm.
a service. You don't necessarily have to like go to the big events. Find small groups of people that meet around your city and just attend one of those and just sit in. You don't have to say anything. You can just listen and just be there.
Mm-hmm.
And in that way, you'll one catch the vibe of like the community and if this is a place where you can see yourself devoting time to. Um, but also like initiating yourself into a new Christian community can be really scary and overwhelming. And it's like walking into a party of
Mm-hmm.
like 100 people by yourself. Like that's frightening and no one wants to do
Yeah.
that. And so I'd say start out small if you're looking to build your faith again. And I also would say that I think being a part of a Christian community does help alleviate your mental illness symptoms and does help with your
Mm-hmm.
overall mental health because at the end of the day it's just teaching you that you are loved and that that love empowers you and makes you capable of anything and that that love isn't going away and it's not going to become any less than it is now. And so I would encourage you to find Christian community if that's something you're comfortable with because I think the lessons are just good, like just for your whole being. And like it's just something that like helps, you know.
Yeah. Right.
Um but I would also encourage you to take it slow. No one's like there's no rush. Like just enter this community in whatever way feels right to you and know that you're not alone. There's a lot of people who have been hurt by the church unfortunately, but that also means there's a lot to be done and a lot of people working on making it better. And so you're not alone in your church hurt. There are people on your side, and not all churches are the same. Not every single church is going to hurt you in the way that your past faith community has.
Mm-hmm.
So I encourage you to seek out that community if you're capable and if you're comfortable, because there's a lot of good for you there.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up,
Mhm.
what is one of the things that you have learned recently in your own personal studies, going through school, that has like just rocked your world?
Yeah. Oh gosh, let's see. Okay, so this is gonna turn into a longer story, so sorry. But um
Sorry, go
there's
for it.
something I've kind of alluded to it in this conversation a little bit, but there's this whole like sect of theology called process theology. And I learned this from reading a book by Dr. Monica Coleman called Bipolar Faith. It's a memoir about her and her struggling with bipolar disorder, like undiagnosed bipolar disorder her whole life, and also just like growing up Black in America. And so I had a really awesome conversation with her on my podcast and we were talking about it. And she introduced this idea of process theology to me, which is this idea that, like, when you are processing through hardship or trauma, like God is processing it with you. It's not the type of like knowing in the sense of,
Mm,
it's not the type of situation where like God just knows what you're going through because you've like explained it in the same way that like I might sit here and explain it to you. It's in a
yeah.
different way in the sense of it's a lot more intimate that like God like knows it firsthand because God just knows you firsthand and you don't have to articulate it or anything like that. Like God is literally in it with you, beside you, within you. Um and that like rocks my world because it I the longer story is happening now, but I kind of had this moment when I was in between my junior and senior year of high school, where I think this idea of a process theology happened for me. I just didn't have the terminology
Mm-hmm.
for it, but I something about me is that I find that I connect the most with God in like nature, and I find that I just feel very close to God through like trees and grass and just like feeling like these are like the direct creations of God. Like God like did that. And so I've always
Mm-hmm.
felt really close to God whenever I'm like out in camp or like away from the city and stuff. And so I remember my senior year after junior year of high school or senior year, my summer after junior year of high school. I was on this trip with my family and we were out of the country and I was miserable, just absolutely miserable. It was right after everything had come out, and I had told them about my cutting and like what I was feeling and all that stuff, and they didn't take it in the way that I wanted them to. And they took it,
Mm-hmm.
and I felt like they were really mad at me, and I felt like they were really disappointed in
Mm,
me. And so I felt very like alienated. And we were in a different country with a different, where they were speaking a foreign language. And so when you're in a country with a foreign language, you're kind of just like stuck with your travel companions. Um, and so I
Yeah.
was just like super stuck with my family, and I felt like they were hurting me, and it was just a miserable 2 weeks. And I remember there was this one day where it was after a really bad, like a really hard conversation I had with my mom around my cutting, where it's just like she just didn't get it, and she was responding in the best way she could, but it was
Mm.
still hurtful. Um,
Yeah.
and so we were walking through the city, this foreign city, where it's like literally just cement everywhere. And I was like a couple feet behind my family, just like mopey, just being like a teenager and really sad.
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking down at my feet, and then I like looked up, and there was just this tree in front of me. And it was this tree that was like one of those that was planted into like cement essentially, and they just kind of planted it there to make the city a little bit
Mm-hmm.
more green. It was the only tree I'd seen in like miles of us walking. And I remember looking up at the tree, and it was as if the tree, it was as if something or someone had tattooed onto the tree this like same exact scars that were on my leg that I had done the week before. And it was like a mirror
Mm.
image. Like I took a picture of it, and I was like, I don't even know how this is possible. Like these markings just in this tree where I did, like, sometimes I think I hallucinated this because it was just like so identical.
Yeah.
Um, but there's a picture, so I know I didn't. But I remember standing there and staring at this tree and just kind of being like, you understand my pain. Like you get this. Um, and it was kind of the first
Mm.
moment for me where this like hard shell around my heart when in regards to God kind of broke down, where I was like, okay, you're not far away. You're not distant. You're not this like guy who's up in the sky watching me cry and not doing anything about it. Like you're very much in this with me, and you understand this pain, and like I can see it. I see it on you. I see it on your creation, that like we suffer identically. And that was like the start of kind of this. I think that I can look back to that and understand that that was the start of me understanding who God truly is in our suffering and during our suffering. And having
Mm-hmm.
that conversation with Dr. Coleman, it like like I hadn't thought about that in like years, and then it reopened my mind.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, that's exactly what I experienced that random day in Barcelona. Like when I saw my scars on that tree, it was just this moment of like, no, like God knows this pain like so intimately and is just processing it with me. And so that just like, it's still something I like get so excited talking about because it just blows my mind. But
Yeah. That is so incredible.
yeah,
Thank you for sharing. I got chills just
yeah,
listening to that. That's so
yeah,
cool. And it's just so sweet to like hear. I love hearing like the Lord's faithfulness in other
mm,
people's stories because so many times, in our own brokenness and our own suffering, we
yeah,
can't see it.
yeah,
And it's like a gift to see it in somebody else's story.
yeah,
So I would love to be able to share like where can our community connect with you? All things, Dear God, I'm sad. When's your merch coming out?
yeah.
All of that.
Yeah, so I have a website to start out with. It's gabriellemwilkinson.com. So you can find like all my other stuff there as well as Dear God I'm Sad stuff. But the main point of Dear God I'm Sad is Instagram, which is at Dear God underscore I'm sad. And you can use the link in the bio to find all the different things, all the links to the podcast, links to the email, links to all these different things. Um, let's see what else. On the podcast is on every single platform. Just Dear God, I'm sad with quotation marks around it. And my merch is launching. I'm waiting for one more package to come because I'm terrified of like selling things to people that I wouldn't wear. And so
Right. Yeah.
um it's going to happen sometime this next week. Probably next Friday is when merch is gonna open.
Wow.
So yeah, that's where you can find me.
So exciting. Can't wait to support.
Also, my personal Instagram, thank you. My personal Instagram is underscore Gabs Wilkes underscore,
Yeah.
but that's like just silly.
Totally. I'm here for it. I'll link all of that for you.
Thank you.
I have one more closing question for
Mhm.
you. And I feel like you've touched on this a little bit, but we close with all of our
Yeah.
guests because this is just a place for wisdom to be shared. And this has been beautiful wisdom that mirrors the Lord's
Mm.
wisdom. And I'm just so excited because I feel like this can be such a healing conversation for so many people.
Thank you.
All that said, if you could provide any wisdom to your younger self or for our community that is listening, what would you share?
Oh, what is the top thing I would share? There's so many. I feel like I've just learned so much that I'm like, I wish I could go back and tell everyone everything. But
Yep.
I think the top thing I would tell people is that, and tell myself, that you are never as alone as your mind may tell you, or your heart may make you feel, or you may like believe. There is
Mm,
always someone who has experienced the same thing as you, always someone who is going to and willing to come alongside you through whatever you're experiencing. And more than that, there's always a God who is within this with you, who is with you through this, who is for you and fighting for the good of your life and fighting for this prosperous and abundant and beautiful life that God promises you. Even if you're a believer or not, that there's always this presence of just pure goodness and love and holiness and sacredness with you. So please, through whatever you may be going through, that you are quite literally never alone. Never, 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 never. And just keep telling yourself that until you believe it. Because at some point you will believe it, but you
mm,
just have to keep telling yourself.
absolutely. Thank you so much, Gabby. This has been such a beautiful conversation, and I can't wait to share all of this.
Oh,
But
thank you, Raina.
I just appreciate your wisdom and your knowledge in this area. Wow. It's so good.
Well, I appreciate you. And I appreciate you like doing this. This is such a cool like community and bringing people together who just to talk about like wisdom and things that made their lives better. I think it's
Yeah.
so awesome that you're fostering this community and all that you've done so far, and I'm excited to see where this goes.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. On that note, guys, we are so thankful to have you here. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Thank you for listening, friend. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you don't want to miss any wisdom or encouragement, be sure to subscribe to the show. And don't forget to rate and review. Your feedback means so much and helps our community grow. If you're looking for more wellness wisdom and free resources, head over to livingwiselywell.com or get connected with me on Instagram at wiselywell. And if you're looking for a break from the hurried health lifestyle, check out my Return to Rest resource for tangible ways to slow down and finally find rest.